I started digitizing my childhood photos because I was running out of space. Physical space, drawers, boxes, old albums that smelled like dust and glue. I told myself it was about preservation, about backing things up before they faded. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they're afraid of losing something they don't remember clearly anymore. Most of the photos were exactly what I expected. Birthdays, backyards, cheap decorations taped to walls that don't exist anymore. The colors were washed out, the corners curled. In some of them, I barely recognized myself. Not because I'd changed, because the photos felt incomplete. At first, I thought it was just nostalgia doing that thing where it rewrites scale, makes rooms feel smaller, faces feel flatter. But after a while, I noticed something else. The photos felt crowded, not visibly, not in any way I could point to. Just occupied. I'd scan one, look away, then look back again, because something felt wrong about the edges, like the frame had been filled in slightly after the fact. It took me longer than I'm comfortable admitting to realize what I was actually seeing. There was someone else in the photos, not standing in the middle, not posing, not smiling at the camera, always at the edge. Sometimes it was just a shoulder, sometimes the back of a head, sometimes the suggestion of a body cropped off by the frame. I didn't notice a face because there never was one. The photos never showed enough. What they did show was consistency. Same height, same posture, a way of standing that didn't belong to a guest or a passerby. They weren't photobombing. They weren't accidental. They were positioned. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Family gatherings blur together. People come and go. But then I noticed something else. The photos were taken in different houses, different years, different cameras, different cities. And the figure was always there, not always close, not always far, but always placed where there should have been empty space. The longer I looked, the more the photos felt less like memories and more like documentation. Like something had been recorded that no one thought to check. I stopped scanning. I sat there with the photos spread out around me, trying to remember if there had ever been someone else around that often. A neighbor, a relative, a friend who drifted away. Nothing fit. Because whoever this was never interacted with anyone. They didn't gesture, didn't turn. They just occupied space. And the worst part wasn't that I couldn't remember them. It was that I couldn't remember the photos without them anymore. Once you see something like that, you can't put it back where it came from. The absence stops being empty. It starts feeling claimed. Once I noticed the figure, I couldn't stop looking for it. Every photo after that felt like it was waiting to be examined. I stopped scanning chronologically and started spreading them out across the table. Different years, different houses, different cameras, the same presence. It didn't behave like a person. It didn't lean into conversations. Didn't turn toward the lens. It just stood, always half removed from the moment. Sometimes it was farther back, almost lost in the background. Other times it was close enough that I could see fabric folds, the curve of a shoulder, never a face. The position kept changing, not randomly, purposefully. In photos where I was front and center, cake, candles, forced smiles, the figure stayed far away. In photos where I was distracted, or turned sideways, or caught mid-movement, it was closer. closer than it should have been. I started lining the photos up based on where I was standing, not where the camera was. That's when the pattern became obvious. Whenever I remembered the moment clearly, the figure was distant. Whenever the memory felt thin, the figure occupied more space. It wasn't replacing me. I was still there in every photo, still smiling, still holding gifts, still standing where my parents remembered me. But the space around me was wrong, crowded, like two versions of the same moment were competing for room. I took a break and made tea, but I kept thinking about posture, about the way people stand without meaning to. Children don't have one. They shift, they slump, they copy whoever's nearby. Adults do, weight on one leg, shoulders set a certain way, hands resting where they always rest. That's what the figure had, not a face, a habit. And the more photos I looked at, the more that habit felt familiar. Uncomfortably so. I showed a few of the photos to my parents that evening, casually, like I'd just noticed something funny. "Do you remember this day?" I asked. My mother smiled. My father nodded. Normal responses. I pointed to the edge of the frame. "Who's that?" They leaned in, squinted. "That's just someone in the background," my father said. "A shadow," my mother added. "These old cameras do that." Neither of them sounded unsure. They weren't scared. They were impatient, like I was insisting on a mistake that had already been explained. I asked about another photo, and another, same answer, different excuses, always dismissal. They saw me. That was enough. They didn't look at the edges long enough for anything else to register. I went back to the table and kept sorting. That's when I noticed something I wish I hadn't. In photos where I wasn't the focus, where my parents were looking somewhere else, or the camera was tilted slightly, the figure wasn't just closer. It was positioned exactly where I remembered standing, not overlapping, not obscuring, occupying, as if the moment had room for both of us, but only one of us had been fully present. I tried to remember those days, the specific ones. Most of them were blank, not erased, just hollow, like remembering that something happened without remembering being inside it. That's when it occurred to me that the photos weren't showing me a stranger. They were showing me a remainder. Something that had been there before I knew how to look for myself. I went home that night with the photos in a folder on my laptop. I told myself I was done, that I'd noticed something weird, and that was the end of it. But the moment I lay in bed, the images kept replaying behind my eyes. Not the birthdays, not the smiles, the edges, the parts that weren't meant to be seen. So I got up and opened the folder again. I zoomed in, not looking for a face, looking for consistency. The photos fought me. They were old, low resolution. The grain turned every shadow into a suggestion. But the figure didn't look like a shadow. Shadows don't hold posture. This did. I started paying attention to the small details, the angle of the shoulders, the way the weight fell, the distance between the arms and the torso. Then I found one that made my stomach drop. It wasn't even a special photo, just a casual shot in the lounge room. My mother had taken it from the hallway, half distracted. I was on the floor with a toy. My father was mid-sentence, mouth open like he'd been caught in the middle of living. And behind them was the glass of a cabinet. One of those cheap display cabinets people used to have. Shiny enough to reflect light, not clean enough to be a mirror. I zoomed in on the cabinet glass, and there it was, not a face, a silhouette, standing where the hallway should have been. The same figure at the edge of the other photos. Only this time, the reflection gave me something the frames never did. It gave me shape, proportion, the line of a jaw blurred by glare, and the posture, my posture. Not the posture I had as a child, the posture I have now. The way my shoulders sit when I'm tired. The way I stand when I'm waiting for something to finish. I stared at it so long my eyes started doing that thing where they blur and refocus. And then it hit me. The figure wasn't photobombing my childhood. It was bleeding into it, like a stain spreading backward through time. Or like memory, leaking, not forward, backward. I looked at myself in the photo again, the kid version of me on the carpet. And for the first time, I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt distance. Like I was looking at someone who had already started to become a stranger. After that, I stopped treating the figure like a mystery. I treated it like a symptom. I started searching for patterns that didn't need faces. I pulled up every photo from the years it appeared, sorted them by date, then by location, then by how clearly I remembered the day. I didn't expect the last one to work, but it did. The days I remembered well, the ones with smells and weather and a feeling in my chest. The figure was far away. The days that felt like I'd read about them in someone else's diary. The figure was close. Close enough to be mistaken for part of the frame. Close enough that the photos felt heavy. I realized something else too. The figure didn't just move closer over years. It moved closer within a single roll, like it was advancing through a moment. There was a set of 5 photos from the same afternoon, out in the backyard. My mother had been taking pictures quickly, one after another, because my father was trying to get me to smile. In the first one, the figure was barely there, just a blur at the edge. In the second, it was clearer. In the third, it was closer still, like it had stepped forward. By the fourth, it occupied almost a third of the frame, and in the fifth, it was standing behind me, not touching, not looming, just behind, like it belonged there. I stared at that 5th photo and waited for my brain to find a normal answer. Relative, neighbor, someone passing by. But there was no one else reacting. My parents were smiling at the kid version of me. My father was crouched down with his hands out like he was coaxing an animal. My mother was laughing. No one looked toward the figure. No one saw it. And the kid version of me didn't react either. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't sense anything behind him. It was like he couldn't feel it because it was already part of him. That thought sat in my chest like a stone. Not because it was supernatural, because it was intimate. Because it felt like discovering that you'd been missing pieces for longer than you've been aware enough to count them. I thought about those hollow days, the ones where I knew a photo existed, but couldn't summon any memory that matched. I thought about how often I'd told people I had a bad memory as a kid, like it was a harmless trait, like it hadn't cost anything. And then I wondered, for the first time, whether the figure wasn't following me through my childhood, but collecting what I failed to carry. I didn't show my parents the cabinet reflection. I didn't show them the sequence from the backyard. I already knew what they would do. They'd glance, they'd dismiss. They'd look at me and see the person they remembered raising, and that would be enough, because people don't like evidence that makes their memories feel unreliable. They don't like the idea that a moment can be split, or that a person can be present and absent at the same time. They especially don't like the idea that it can happen without anyone noticing. So I stopped asking them, and instead, I tried something I hadn't tried once during all of this. I took a photo, not a selfie, not a posed shot, a normal photo, the kind of photo parents used to take. I set my phone on a shelf in my hallway and put it on a timer. 10 seconds. I stood in my living room like I was waiting for someone to come home. Not smiling, not performing, just standing there. I waited for the shutter sound. It clicked. I walked over and opened the photo. It was exactly what I expected. Me in the living room, the hallway stretching away behind me, clean, normal, a relief I didn't want to admit I needed. Then I noticed the edge of the frame, a familiar pressure behind my eyes. The photo was fine. I was in it, but the hallway behind me looked crowded. Not visibly, not in a way I could circle and point to. It just felt occupied, like the image had recorded more than it was meant to. I zoomed in slowly, and there, at the very end of the hallway, just before the darkness swallowed it, was a shape, not a face, not detail, just posture, weight on one leg, shoulders set. A stance I recognized the way you recognize a word you haven't said in years. My stance, but older, tired, waiting. As if it had been standing there long before I set the timer. As if it had been waiting for me to look back. I stared until my eyes hurt. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I closed the photo. I put the phone down. And I stood very still in my living room, listening to my own house. Because for the first time, it wasn't the past bleeding into the present. It was the present proving it had always contained something else. And in the quiet, in the part of silence where you start to hear your own body, I realized I couldn't remember taking the photo at all. Not the timer, not the click, not walking to pick up the phone, just the result, just the evidence, as if the moment of making it had slipped right through me and gone somewhere that wasn't mine to keep.